Dozens of clinical trials around the world have halted as a result of the Trump administration's stop work order on research funded by the U.S. Agency for International Development, known as USAID. USAID is responsible for distributing foreign aid, and President Trump wants to overhaul the agency to cut down the size of federal government and what he has called wasteful spending. According to a report in the New York Times, the stop work order has left thousands of people with experimental drugs and devices in their bodies and no one to monitor them. Some of the trials that have been halted include malaria, HIV, cholera, and tuberculosis treatments in Africa, South America, and Asia. The Times global health reporter Stephanie Nolen spoke with several doctors and aid workers who were technically not allowed to speak with the media under the terms of the stop work order. She writes that these researchers face, quote, agonizing choices: violate the stop work orders and continue to care for trial volunteers, or leave them alone to face potential side effects and harm. Stephanie joins us now. Stephanie, what are some of the doctors' main concerns for their patients? I know that you spoke to one. It's a ring device that is placed in patients, and under the stop work order, they weren't even allowed to remove it, but they chose to.
Yeah, that was a clinical trial in South Africa that was testing a vaginal ring, so a sort of silicone ring that women would wear in their vaginas that would protect against pregnancy and HIV infection. And it was one of the researchers I spoke to there were in the same situation as many others I spoke to. They got overnight orders that they needed to stop all work that they were doing in this USAID funded trial, but also that they were forbidden from even communicating with the trial participants, which meant that theoretically they were supposed to leave these women out there in the community with these experimental devices in their bodies. And as you said, Lindsay, they made the choice, violating the terms of that order, to call those women in and make sure those devices were removed and collected, because they said their ethical obligation to the people who were volunteering for this research meant that they couldn't just follow that order.
Let's talk about that, how these medical professionals are balancing this order from the administration and this ethical code that they have sworn to.
Yeah, so there's something called the Declaration of Helsinki, which is supposed to govern all scientific research. The medical researchers in countries around the world are signatories to this. It dates from the 1960s. The US medical researchers are also signatories. And it says you have a set of obligations to people who participate in scientific research. One is that you have a duty of care to, as far as you can, make sure that they suffer no harm. And secondly, one that was really important to everyone that I spoke with is that you have an obligation to continually provide information to people who are participating in the trial if along the way you start to discover something that's happening with the drug or the vaccine that you're researching. And most importantly, when you're finished, you have an obligation to go back to communities and tell them what you've discovered. And of course, we're all familiar, right, with the horror stories of research that was carried out on impoverished or marginalized communities where people were treated as lab rats and not given the access to information in the trial. And so that's what this declaration is supposed to cover, and which these scientists who were halted in the middle of their work felt like they were being asked to violate.
So ethical considerations aside, you report that as U.S. influence wanes, someone else is going to fill that void, right? What influence are you seeing when you travel, and what does it mean for not only our role on the world stage, but how people view us?
Well, I think it's become pretty clear in the last 72 hours, right, that this is a wholesale dismantling of USAID, and whatever remains of U.S. foreign assistance, there is no more USAID as it was. And although there was an initial conversation about a 90-day pause, that clearly is not what's happening. Grants are being terminated. Staff have been fired. The lease has been canceled on the USAID headquarters, and the Border Patrol has moved in there. So there is no more USAID. And, I think it's really important to think about the agency as an instrument of soft power, right? It's sure there was compassion behind a lot of this giving, but ultimately it served U.S. foreign policy aims, whether that was reminding people that they were a positive partner or creating a space to do that scientific research. Without that space, I think you can expect to see China moving in there, and probably also other actors.
Stephanie Nolen, appreciate your time. Also enjoyed your podcast that was released on The Daily. Thank you.